Welcome to Bator International's Classic Online Motorcycle Sales. In this chapter, we're going to be reassembling the engine for the 1957 Harley Davidson XL Sportster rebuild. We're going to go ahead and scrape off all these gaskets, as you see, on the heads. Clean them up, reshoot them. The valves were already done. Again, this bike was rebuilt before I disassembled it for reassembly, or re-restoration, I should say. So we're going to go ahead and get those cleaned up. The rocker boxes are going to have to be completely disassembled. We're going to have to run them through the sandblaster and get the proper finish on them. So we'll get that done. And we're also going to go ahead and pull the old pistons out. We have the new cylinders sitting here. We're going to go ahead and reinstall the pistons. We're going to clean up the cases. And now that we have the all the parkerizing done for the rear motor mount, we'll go ahead and get that installed and go ahead and start putting it back together. Let's talk about piston fit, cylinder bores, end gaps on the rings. Now these pistons are actually made in Japan. They're very, very nice pistons. These are new old stock from Dixie. And what they call for as far as clearance on the piston to cylinder wall is about 2 to 3 thousandths, and we've set these up at 2.5, which is just how we want them. And then when you go to fit the rings, you actually stuff the ring down into the cylinder itself. And they call for an end gap clearance of between 10 and 15 thousandths. So once you have them fit into the cylinders, you go ahead and take your feeler gauge and just line it up, see if it'll fit in the hole. And if they do, between 10 and 15, gap is exactly where you need it. So once we get the lower case cleaned up, we'll go ahead and fit the pistons on the rods and go ahead and install the top end. Lucky for me, these valves have already been done, so I don't have to go through the ordeal of rebuilding those. But we just put them in the parts washer and then sprayed them down with the brake clean just to make sure we got off all the oil residues and so on. So all I'm going to do is basically tape off the valve springs and also the ports and of course the combustion chamber. Then we're just going to respray it silver. Again, the top end is redone, so that saves me a lot of time. And being that we're getting very, very close, matter of fact, today is December 1st, I've got to really kick ass on this project. So I'm very happy that this portion of it is done. The next step is to go ahead and start cleaning up these cases, get them ready to have the cylinders put back on it. And we'll go ahead and reinstall the kicker arm, or kicker shaft I should say, the rear motor mount, and then go ahead and put all the clutch pack back into the engine. And we'll also pull these pistons, fit the new ones on, and basically get this motor back together. So we'll continue on the quest. All right, I'm starting to clean. I'm using our good old-fashioned brake cleaner here, and I'm just going around and hitting the cases wherever it's dirty. And then I'll take my old nasty toothbrush and then just give it a quick wash. Again, we're just basically dealing with cosmetics right now, trying to get the engine looking perfect. And I did spray up here, and I actually got my lifter blocks, they were painted silver. So I'll have to go in there and actually hand paint these back in. I mean, you won't be able to see it, but I'll go ahead and do that with a brush, and a little bit of silver paint. So again, it's just not worth pulling these just to respray them and putting them back in. It's just not. And I see that the guy that built this engine used a basic silicone, so I'll go around and pick all this nasty stuff out. When I put cases together, usually I'll use a Yamabond or Honda Bond. I think it's number 5. And that is, to me, the absolute best case sealer that you can buy. So we're going to go ahead and continue cleaning this and get it all looking pretty. I have to scrape the generator gasket off. And as you can see, I went ahead and plugged everything up as far as the holes are concerned, so I don't get no crap down in there, because these 4 holes actually go to the transmission gearbox. This one just popped out. You got to watch that. And so anyhow, just make sure that you get everything clean and looking nice. And then again, like I said, we'll go ahead and yank these pistons here in a minute. It's amazing what a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of brake cleaner will do. Basically, I was just spraying it down and then going around with the toothbrush, cleaning up the cases. Turned out quite nice. Went ahead and put the cork in the hole there to scrape all the gasket off so none of it fell into the engine itself. Almost looking like a brand new engine. That's what it should look like. All right, just a little bit more work there, and then we'll go ahead and jump on the pistons. Now that we have the cases looking good and we have the pistons off, it's now time to start reassembly. Dun, 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 dun. Well, if you remember, the last thing that we pulled off of this engine was the rear motor mount. I had to remove these two studs, swing the motor mount out, and pull it out. Okay, so now that I have it Parkerized, I have the studs recad plated. I slid the rear motor mount onto the bottom stud, swung it up, installed the two studs here, and it is now in place. But before you go bolting this down, just remember that you have to install the lower portion of your battery box into place. Now you can throw your bolts on, you can throw your washers on and so on, and you can basically tighten it down. But what I would do is I would take and clamp something here, either a vice grip or maybe a nut and bolt, just to make sure that this is sucked up tight before you go and draw these down complete. And also when you go to put your bolts in, make sure that you throw a little bit of sealer on the actual threads, because these holes go all the way into your gearbox. And if you're running at high speed, or again, if you have any pressure in your cases, this is a place for some of your oil seepage coming out of your gearbox. After you get that done, the next move is to go ahead and install your kicker shaft. Basically goes through the hole of your rear motor mount casting into the back side of the case here. Now once you run the shaft through your casting, you have to go ahead and put your what I'll call indexing washer into place. Now behind the indexing washer you have this oil seal. Now this is a really cheesy way that they design this. Now if you go ahead and look at this, you'll see that there's a shelf here which basically is not a very good seal. So what I would do is I would just take an O-ring and throw it in behind that seal, and then put your washer in there and then slide your shaft through. And once you do that, you can go on to the other side and install the kicker gear, which we'll show you here in a minute. One of the biggest problems you're going to run into doing a 100-point restoration is getting the correct hardware where it needs to be. Case in point, for the lifter blocks, they have to be 1038 CP headed bolts, and they have to be CAD plate. Now, my basic Bible is the parts manual, and if you take a look over here, this is 4005W, and if you go to the back of the book, you can go ahead and see exactly what 4005 is. 4005, 5/16 18 coarse head or coarse thread, 1 inch long, and the W indicates CAD plating. So again, CAD plated, the CP 1038 hardware, and also if we go back to that page, now that I lost it, it did not indicate that there was any washer underneath that. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, right here. There is no indication of a washer. So basically, the bolt goes directly on top of the lifter block, white or CAD plate with a 1038 CP insignia on top of the head of the bolt. So again, it's just a real time-consuming portion of the restoration. But again, if you're going to have the bike judged, or if you want to have a 100-pointer, that's the process that you have to go through. When you go to install the upper bolts for your rear motor mount, again, what I'll do is I will take a little bit of well, I got Honda Bond here just a little bit, and I'll throw a little bit on the threads and then run them down in the holes. Now, when you do go to install these, now if you take a look in the actual parts manual, they call for a 4348 with a 7045 lock washer. And the 7045 is basic Parkerized lock washer. But the 4348, you will find it nowhere in the actual book itself. And then if you go back here and check, there is no 4348 showing exactly what size that is. So what I did was I went ahead and checked it with a little, well, with a little pick actually, and I went down and felt the depth of the hole, measured it, and figured out the right size length of the actual bolt itself. Now you have to be careful, like I mentioned, because these holes do go through to the gearbox, and if you use too long of a bolt, you'll actually be, well, what can I say, riding right on top of one of your gears down there. So you want to make sure that you do not use too long of a bolt for these 4 holes. And like I mentioned, I also went ahead and pinched these tight so that these two, two pieces are good and set in place before you mount this up to the back of your engine case. So go ahead and get that done. And then also what I do is, like for the hardware, since you don't want to booger them up, I'll actually take a blue rag before I take my socket, my 6-point, and put it on the actual bolt itself. And that way you do not mark the bolt head itself, because these sockets or your wrench will leave a register mark on top of the new CAD plating, or even on your parkerizing. Now that you have the 4 top bolts mounted on the rear motor mount, the next step is to go ahead and bolt in the 3 nuts here on the studs that are coming out of the left case. You have to leave this upper nut loose, because you actually have the chain oiler that comes off of this fitting down, mounts onto that nut, and then goes over to the chain. Now if you look at the parts book, this part number here, 63590-53A, but what the book doesn't tell you is that the nut itself should be CAD plated, and then the tube and the rest of the clamping unit all goes parkerized. So I went ahead and I CAD plated that unit, and right now I've got it, being that we have rain outside, I have the acid sitting here inside, and hopefully I won't drop my phone in. So I've got it suspended to where the nut, the CAD plated nut, is out of the acid, and I am eating off all of the CAD plate off of the actual tube itself. So once I have that done, then I'll go ahead and throw it in the parkerizing solution, which I have here with the hot plate today, and get it with the proper finish. So again, one of the things that you will get marked off for if you do not do that properly. When you go to install your kicker gear, put the shaft in along with all your seals and the little locking spacer there, or the indexing spacer, and then run the nut up on the actual kicker gear itself. After you do that, check for end play, and if you see there, I've got probably about 15 thousandths end play that I'm going to take up with some shims. Now they make shims for this purpose in 7 thousandths increments, so I'm going to see if I can round up a couple 7 thousandths shims, stick it in there to take up that end play. And believe me, if anybody's out there that's owned a Sportster and has missed the ratchet, this is some of the stuff that you can do to, let's say, get away from having the Sportster knee, which is in excruciating pain. I've been there, done that many a time. So we're going to go ahead and shim this here. And we also put the studs in for the cylinder base. And what I've done is I've parkerized these shafts, or the studs themselves, and I went ahead and used some red Loctite and ran them on down in there, and then I also just put a little index there. As far as height-wise, let me see, what did I have ended up with these here? Looks like we have 1 inch, 230 thousandths roughly is the height of the actual stud coming out of the case. and I've checked that against the almighty original paint 1958, so I know I'm right. So we'll go ahead and shim up the kicker, and we'll continue on. Now that we have our kickstart shaft all mounted and in position, it has very, very little play in it. I put the shims between the case itself and the actual, what I'll call retaining washer. That takes up all this play back and forth. Now on the other side, if we walk over here, I have the gear mounted, and this nut here takes this little, what I'll call step, faces outward with the full flat of this nut up against the gear itself. And you also have your lock washer behind it, so make sure you get that all nice and tight and that locked down. Now when you do go to mount this this kicker gear, make sure that you have your spring in position along with your gear that's going to engage the back of your clutch basket. So to position this properly, you take your kicker shaft with a notch on the very top, and then you take this opening here and you position it between like 6 and 8 o'clock. With the, I don't know if you could see back in there, it has the stop right up against the gear. Now that's the perfect position for when you go to kick the engine through. It'll kick, and then it'll hit the retainer, and then it'll return. So that is now done, and we're going to move on to probably putting the clutch into the engine, or maybe even the top end. Okay, so I've elected to go ahead and install all the components in the primary side case. That means the clutch, the compensator, primary chain, chain tensioners, and so on. So we'll go ahead and get started on that. Now before you go ahead and start to install anything, make sure you have all your hardware tight and everything's in good shape. I'm going to go ahead and replace this seal on the end of the shaft. I decided to do that, and also the O-ring. So we'll get that underway, and also just make sure you have all of your kicker shaft components in place like we just described. When you go to replace your seal here, matter of fact, this is the one I pulled out. I just used a screwdriver and popped it out. And then to install the new one, what you can do is use your push rod for your clutch, and then just go ahead and get a socket that lays over that, and this will actually help position the seal in place. So you just go ahead and use the socket, smack it with a hammer until you feel it bed, and you got the new seal in place. You may remember when I was disassembling the engine that I said to go ahead and put your chain adjuster in first. So when we go to reinstall this, I'm going to take all three components and lay them up on the shafts. Again, because if you go to put these in and you try to slide this in later, forget it, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to sit the camera down for a minute and see if I can get a decent enough angle so you can watch me install this. So stand by. All right, now that I have these items in, I made sure that I greased the shafts before I slid them on, just to make sure we have good lubrication between them. So now our adjuster's captured, and we can go ahead and start assembling the compensator, which is very simple to do. You just run the nut up, and then also we'll install all the clutch assembly as well. So, okay, onward and upward. Okay, I installed the compensator, and I've got my special compensator wrench here, and I also have the what I'll call my special pliers here that holds the actual clutch basket in place, the inside. Now, there's a few different tools that you can use for that, but this is the one I have. So we're going to go ahead and tighten up both of these nuts. I'll probably put a good cheater bar on this one here. Well, matter of fact, on both of them. I don't know exactly what the book says for torque, but I usually do it by feel. So once I get these tightened down, I'll go ahead and bend over my lock tab on the internal nut. I can start assembling the clutch, and pretty much everything is completed on the left side primary cover. You see I have my tool in position here as well to keep both gears locked into place. So I won't be giving the crankshaft any stress, as well as the rear shaft for the transmission. So there you have it. Now that we have the primary chain installed, the compensator tight, the clutch nut tight with the lock washer bent over, and I gave it just enough play. This may be a little loose in some people's eyes, but I'd prefer a little loose and a little tight. Got everything tightened down, and now we're going to go ahead and start installing the clutch, or the clutch plates, I should say. You have your big steel ring that goes in first, and then you have what I'll call the clutch steels. And what I do normally is I'll take and center the open gap here on the hole, slide it back, and I'll take my fiber plate, and again, a little tough with one hand, I'll install the fiber. And then the next steel plate that I go, the last one we had with an open, and this time I'm going to go with the closed hole. So that'll be my pattern of putting the steels in. So I'll go open, close on the actual steel plates. So we'll go ahead and get all these installed and get the springs on, and then when I come back I'll show you the proper adjustment on the springs. Now that we have everything installed inside of the clutch, we're going to go ahead and put the pressure plate on. Two things that you have to watch out for. If you take a look, you'll see a little divot up here. If you take that and you line it up with this little notch right there, that'll put you in perfect alignment. But you also have to be careful with aligning your push rod with the notch or the indent on the inside of the pressure plate. So there's the two things that you have to line up. So we're going to go ahead and get that installed, and then we'll go ahead and adjust the actual spring tension. Now that we have all the clutch discs in place, all the springs and spring cups in place, we have the push rod properly indexed, we're going to go ahead and adjust the actual pressure plate. So from the actual surface of this cup right here, the spring cup, to the back side of the pressure plate right here has to be set at 3/16 of an inch. So I went ahead and I adjusted these already, but if you could take a look, I'm perfectly adjusted there. And if I go over here, I'm out just a little bit, plus I don't have any tension on these screws yet, or these nuts. So I'll draw them up and get my proper tension there, and I'll go around and check each cup to make sure that I'm bang on. After that's all set, all I need to do then is go ahead and put the outer clutch cover on it with the gasket and the little locking screws, and basically it's ready to button up. The next step in the process is to go ahead and install the pistons, rings, cylinders, and heads. We have the cases all prepped and ready to go. We have the studs in place, parkerized. We have the cylinder nuts. I've checked the wrist pins to fit. Very, very nice clearance, so we don't have to worry about any of the wrist pin bushings. And also make sure you check your cases for any debris that may have fallen in while you're doing the work, because again, you don't want that stuff floating around. I did detect that there was what can I say, somebody looks like they took a screwdriver or something and tried to shoehorn that cylinder up. So I went ahead and kissed that off to make sure we didn't have any obstructions or anything holding that up. So we'll get underway with this part of the project, and then after that we'll probably start working on the rocker boxes. Being that this engine has the two cylinders that are opposed to each other, in other words, you have the two intake valves towards the center and the exhaust towards the outgoing front or rear of the engine, you have to, what can I say, take your pistons, and if you take a look, you'll see that there's a deeper indent in one of the sides of the piston. So that'll be the intake, because your intake valve is larger than your exhaust. So you want to sort of face the pistons to each other, intake. A lot of guys will say, well, that little notch that's in there, it has to either be on the left side of the engine or the right side of the engine. But if that was the case, and if you did that, then basically you'll have one piston that is set in there backwards. So always go for the deepest inset or incut into the piston towards the intake valve. When installing these pistons, I used a little bit of grease in the wrist pin bushing, and luckily enough these are a really nice slip fit wrist pin into the piston. I have the spiral circlip already installed on the other side. So with the intake mark pointing inward, you just go ahead and fit the piston, again one-handed, a little bit difficult. And there you have it. So I'll just install that one circlip, and the two pistons are installed. When fitting your piston rings, refer to the instructions that come in the box along with the piston. Some rings are marked with a little index mark which will indicate it either up or down. It'll also, some pistons will mark which ring needs to go in which gland. But this piston does not. So none of these rings have any marks on them whatsoever. So the best thing you could do is just check to make sure, just for the top and bottom, that your ring gland is exactly the same size as the top and bottom. And fit both of the compression rings in the holes to make sure that they all fit. Okay, I'll go ahead and install those, and then we'll get ready to slip the cylinder on after I get the other rings on the second piston. I'm getting ready to slip on the front cylinder, and I just wanted to go over the gaskets. Now, depending on who you talk to, they'll either tell you to put the gaskets on wet, dry, use a little bit of copper coat, Honda Bond for the base gaskets, put the head gaskets on dry again, or use a little bit of silver paint, the heat resistant paint. You can dust it with that too. So there's a variety of ways to go, but being that these head gaskets have a little bit of a silicone coating on it, they'll go on dry. The other head gaskets, which I don't even know where they're at the moment, they're more of a, what I'll call an asbestos type. And we've used these for many years, and they work well, but again, I would coat these before I would install them. But I think I'm going to go with the more modern head gaskets, the James, which seem to be a little bit more, what can I say, updated as far as the quality control. So we'll go ahead and slide on the cylinder and go from there. I went ahead and just mounted the cylinder heads on, didn't tighten them down or anything like that, and I have my cylinder base nuts loose at this time. The reason for it is because you want to align your intake manifold, make sure everything will fit, because at this point you can still shift the cylinders around a little bit as well as the heads to make sure you have a perfect airtight fit for your intake manifold, which this one here looks really good. I'm okay with it, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten my base nuts now, and then we'll go on to installing the heads. I just finished tightening up all the cylinder base nuts, and you'll see right here I actually have a little baggie that I slip over the bolt or the nut before I actually put the wrench on it, and this way it'll save your making register marks on the actual nuts themselves. So just a little bit of a tech tip there as well. So the bases are tight, and we are ready to install the cylinder heads. Also wanted to make note with regards to the head gaskets. Put them on dry, at least that's what I'm doing, because again these have this silicone coating on them. But just double check to make sure that all your oil galley holes line up. Even though James is a very good gasket, you know, there could be human error as well. So just make sure that everything is looking good before you slip the heads on. Now that we have the heads on, we're going to go ahead and torque the bolts down. The ultimate torque spec is 65 pounds, and you do it in a cross pattern in increments. And what I do to my cylinder bolts is I go ahead and put a little bit of anti-seize on them, as you can see. And just enough, you don't gob it on, you just put a little thin coating on it and drop them down in and tighten them up. Like I mentioned, cross pattern, 65 foot-pounds of torque, and like I also mentioned, make sure that you line up your intake manifold when you do your final tighten. That'll give you a perfect fit. The next step is to go ahead and tear down the rocker boxes. We've got to pull the rocker arms and the shafts out and pull all the fittings off, because we have to polish the front, what I'll call the shovel face, on both front and the rear. And on the front, the only portion that gets polished on the rest of the actual head or actual box itself is this small area right in here. So basically where my thumb is, all the way over on this line to here, and that is it. The rest of it is all rough cast look. Now on the rear, basically it's just the opposite little portion gets polished. So again, you can see how I have it laid out on marks. And then of course the face gets polished. So we'll go ahead and get these torn down and we'll start polishing it. And also I just pulled the primary cover out of the sandblaster. I went ahead and finished all the script work and hit it with some real heavy media. And then what I do is I take a Brillo pad and I scrub down the case, which gets rid of that real powdery look, and then throw it in the parts washer, just give it a little bit of a coat of oil on it. So it's as good as it gets, and I'll tell you, it doesn't look too bad. I just finished polishing the areas that need to be polished on the rocker boxes. As you can see, it's just that one corner and on the face, and this is the rear. So you get the face polished, and then the back, what I'll call the back nodule of the other side on the left side. And that's as far as you need to go. So right now I'm going to go ahead and tape off the face of this and the other portion that I polished. Go ahead and run it in the sandblaster, and then go ahead and get that texture set up, and then we can go ahead and start reassembly. Here's one of the rocker boxes, all taped up and ready for the sandblaster. I covered up all the polished areas. I've got some plugs in the other orifices just to make sure I keep most of the sand out. So we're going to go ahead and throw it in the blaster and see how she turns out. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, but let's give it a shot. I just leaned my phone up on the sandblaster. And I'll do my best to keep the part in the frame. Now this is a real heavy grit. I think it's called 3070. It's a garnet. You want to make sure you get all the surfaces that need to be blasted. And again, these were never perfect out of the gate, so you don't have to get every little thing exactly perfect. Like you see I have some nicks up there, up at the top right here. You can just hit it with a little blast and that'll sort of round those off. And if by chance you do hit a little bit of the blast underneath the tape area on your polish, you can always go back and clean it up after the fact. But you want as rough a finish on these rocker boxes as you can, because they should be a raw casting look. See, my plug fell out. That's all right. Pretty happy with that finish. Okay, let's pull it on out and let's see how she looks. Voila. You want to close that door as quickly as you can. Okay, looking pretty good. Now what I'll do is I'll take this over to the soap and water, and I'll take my Brillo pad and I'll scrub this up, which basically knocks that dusty look off of the places we just sandblasted. And then I'll go ahead and peel the tape off after the fact. As you can see, I've got quite a few pieces that I have to blast, including the other rocker for this engine. All right, so let me go scrub this one up, and let's take a look and see how she turned out. This is nothing very high tech. You just take your SOS pad or Brillo pad, turn on the water, and scrub away. Now that we have the rocker boxes all properly polished, sandblasted, and finished, with all the new rocker arms in it, new gaskets and everything, it's time to assemble them onto the top of the heads. Now in your James gasket kit or one of the other gasket kits you buy, you're going to see that there were rocker box gaskets in the kit. Now, to be politically correct, for 1957 all the way up till 1970, they did not use any rocker box gaskets. So unless you're going through judging and stuff like that, you can put them on. But needless to say, again, if you're going to have them judged, don't put them on because you will be dinged. So we're going to go ahead and put on some nice Yama Bond or Honda Bond 4, the gray stuff. And then we'll go ahead and put all the screws in, or bolts. And then we'll go ahead and put the push rods in, oil lines, and then get ready for reassembly back into the frame. Well, I'm sorry to say that my Honda Bond 4 is like gorilla snot, or coming out like a nasty booger. They're basically toast, no good. So I had to roll over to my Bond 5, which it's black instead of gray, and it's a little more watery. So I'm just letting this set up a little bit before I go ahead and apply it onto the cylinder head. That way I'm not having to clean up so much of the black goo after I torque things down. Anyhow, this is where we're at, and we'll be wrapped up with the engine here very shortly. Well, now that we have the rocker boxes all tight and secure, it's time for us to move on to installing the push rods. So the basic theory is if you have a lifter that is at the highest point, let's say on the number 1 exhaust, that is the time to go ahead and adjust the number 2 exhaust push rod. So and in this case, number 1 is all the way up. So I installed the push rod and I got it to where it's just finger tight. Or let's say it tightens up and then you just back it off a quarter turn so you have free play on it. And that's when you tighten down your the nut, your pinch nut. But after you do tighten that up, double check to make sure that you still have free play on your push rod. So that's basically it. So again, very simple. Just use a little bit of feel when you go to adjust the push rods, but when you have a fresh engine, loose is better than tight, because what's going to happen is your valves are going to start seating in, and it actually is going to give you less play on the actual push rod itself. So leave them a little bit loose, and you should be in great shape. Well, there you have it. One complete engine ready to be installed into the chassis. We've got the rocker boxes on. As you can see, we have the proper polishing on this side, sandblasted here. The rear portion of the back cylinder rocker box is polished like that. The front portion is not, and the rear portion of the front cylinder is not, and then again the front portion of the left side rocker box is. So that is the proper way of going about that. Now we went ahead and installed the distributor and got the timing bang on. And how you do that is you set your points at 22 thousandths. You take your advancer and throw it all the way forward, which is full advanced. You get your timing on your front cylinder compression stroke lined up with your mark on your inspection hole over here. I don't know if you can see that or not, dead center. So make sure your front cylinder is on compression stroke, your line is dead center, and then you come over here and the little mark on the top of your cam lobe lines up with the fiber on your set of points, and that is perfect. If not, you just basically bust this nut loose and you adjust the cap to get it to that point. So there you have it. The entire engine is rebuilt. It's ready to install. I hope you picked up a few pointers on rebuilding these engines through this process. And again, I think it's going to be a very nice bike. So if you have any questions, give me a call at 805-798-1802, or you can go to our website at www.bator.international.com and make sure you sign up on the website. Also, if you like what we're doing, give us a thumbs up or check the like box, and also join up on our YouTube page as well. Thank you very much.